Hi BookTube and welcome to a new video. This is a recent reads for a couple of contemporary British writers. Both had new novels released in the last month or so. The Blind Light by Stuart Evans and The Liar's Dictionary by Elley Williams, who won the Republic of Consciousness Prize for her book Ad Trib a couple of years ago. I follow them now. I follow Stuart Evans on Twitter. I'm not sure that I do follow Elley Williams. I'm going to start with The Blind Light, and the first thing I'm going to say is that for me it's a 5-star read. For a type of book that normally I may not even pick up to read, in that it's character driven, which is never the highest value of a novel for me. But this works particularly well, not only because you really care about the characters, but because of its setting. So the book starts in late 1950s Britain, where there's still a time of national service, and we are introduced to a character called Drummond Moore, who is a worker at the Ford motor car factory in Dagenham in Essex, but he's doing his national service up in the northwest of England. And early on he sort of manages to signal a guy in a card game that this guy is being played, that it's a setup, and he sort of catches his eye and manages to tip him off. And this guy is called James Carter, who is very, very grateful to Drum, and they become fast friends. And James Carter is from a very probably aristocratic background, but if not certainly upper middle class. So there's a class difference of the sort of the factory floor guy Drummond and this man of ease, James Carter, who gets them a cushy number during their 2 years national service. They never have to go and actually have a tour abroad. They work in the kitchens on the base, and they sort of dominate the life of the base, in that Carter spins his wonderful tales that are all sort of completely made up of action that they've seen and how Drum has saved his life and all this sort of thing. And Drum very much plays along, and you get the impression very quickly that Drum is almost like his Batman. You know, again, this class thing. But what really sets this book off is that late 50s, height of the Cold War, that there is a place near the camp called Doomtown, which has been a detailed reconstruction, or anticipated reconstruction I should say, of a town that's been hit, or a village that's been hit by nuclear fallout, for the soldiers to train on. And it's an extraordinary description that Evans gives, and for me, I love the poetics of decay. But this isn't the decay like sort of, fruit rotting on the vine. This is sort of, an instantaneous sort of vaporization decay of an imagined nuclear bomb having dropped. And it's a stunning piece of writing, and it is this nuclear sort of Holocaust theme that sort of hangs over, sort of weaves its way in and out through the entire course of the book, because it's a sort of an epic family tale of Drum's family over 2 generations, and Carter's family to a lesser extent. But you're always pulled back by the latest development in the world, through the Cold War, through the nuclear threat. So Drum sort of falls in love with the daughter of a pub landlord called Gwen. They marry at the end of his service. Before they marry, I would say that they used Doomtown as a meeting point, which is kind of sinister. They marry and return to Dagenham, and he returns to the Ford factory plant. Then the next sort of world event. So the Ford factory plant was on strike, as it often was. And there's an interesting observation here made by Evans, in that while Drum and Carter are bunking together, they both put out books to read, and Drum is reading some Marx in the sort of tradition of the sort of working class sort of political radical, and Carter pulls out a Russian novel. And it's an interesting point, because in the First World War, the British officer class in the army, when they weren't actually, going over the top of the trenches, they all sat around smoking and reading poetry. And the working class were, as portrayed here, if they were reading anything other than sort of, Pulp Fiction, it was reading Marx and Lenin. So I thought that was a good point. Well, sort of very, very, it didn't draw attention to itself. It just slipped in quite nicely. But the next sort of flashpoint is the Cuban Missile Crisis, when it looked like the world was on the brink of nuclear confrontation, and Drum sort of gathers up his young family, his wife and his 2 young children, and is going to drive back up to the northwest to where Carter lives on a family farm, because he believes that Carter has a nuclear proof bomb shelter there, and that's the way he can protect his family. And yet again, this sort of class thing, that Carter himself wouldn't be in the nuclear bunker because he is automatically part of the sort of the local government infrastructure that has its own bunker to continue to run the country in the wake of a nuclear attack. He's one of the privileged, the elite, although his family would not go with him. And this is the point at which we start seeing the secrets and the deceptions practiced within the 2 marriages. Carter's marriage to his wife Brenda, and Drum's to his wife Gwen. And what's really well done in this, and why I think the character-driven part of the book is very effective, is A, it's very believable, these dilemmas and deceptions and little sort of white lies. B, they sort of escalate in a way that you wouldn't have foreseen, but not in a way that sort of blows the whole thing apart. Because Drum and Gwen's relationship is tight. Throughout the course of the whole book, they are not unfaithful to each other. There's a time where Gwen has a sort of a fantasy of maybe she will be, but it's a good marriage. But within that, there are limitations, and there are still deceptions and lies. Now, do those lies help keep the marriage together, or do they threaten it? And that's throughout the book, and I think it's really well done. It's slightly different in Carter's case, because as a member of the aristocracy, he just expects to get his own way and everyone to sort of kowtow to him the whole time. But while it's a portrayal of sort of family drama and family life, at root there's always this question of, is this enough? Is having a family enough? Is that all? Is that enough to make a worthwhile life? And I think Evers sort of traces this very, very insightfully. And again, against this much bigger backdrop of all of life could end, like that, under a sort of, mutually assured destruction of a nuclear holocaust. So then the next sort of way that the sort of nuclear thing comes back in is in the 1980s, where actually no, I think before that there's like what looks like a drill, or is it an actual when the sirens go off, is it for real? And again, Drum drives his. Well, by then Drum is living in that environment. He's left Fords, and he takes his family's shelter into Carter's shelter, and it's a brilliantly tense, taut scene of these people are now locked together, for the foreseeable future. And again, as an example of the class difference. So Drum's family make it inside first, and then comes Carter's family. "Come in, all of you," Drum says. "Come, sit. We were just about to make some tea." The 2 teenagers, who are Carter's, slope towards their contemporaries. Tom wearing a shirt open at the neck, slim-cut trousers, boat shoes, hair combed straight, the spit of his youthful father. Natasha wearing a similar outfit, a striped blouse and jeans, boat shoes. A holiday look, the way they dress when they pack their car to head for Spain. So we've had the sort of the sort of the fretting of what Drum's family are going to take into the shelter, whereas here these people who believe they almost walk on air, they're completely untouched, unscratched by reality because of their class, have turned up to a nuclear shelter where they don't know when they're going to be released from its bowels again, dressed for a holiday. And I think, again, that's really, really brilliantly done. But the whole scene is really tense and fraught with sort of, you know, family conflict. And in its own way sort of explodes dramatically. And then we have again, the sort of the further, the next sort of intrusion of the sort of nuclear age is Reagan and Afghanistan, and it could all kick off almost by accident, a sort of a mistake of sort of the switch being thrown, where it wasn't a Cuban Missile Crisis, it was just a glitch that almost brought the world unerringly into nuclear war. And then the final one is there was a British drama on TV, which I remember when I was growing up, called Threads, which tried to realistically, depict a nuclear holocaust and the few survivors left, and sort of very graphic visual detail, and that is sort of mentioned in here. And then we get on to the other two, the next generation of Annika the daughter and Nathan the son. And again, coming back to this question of, is it a good enough life to protect your family, to give them the best start you can, given that, Drum and Gwen are working class and there's very much a glass ceiling to what they can provide. And they, there is a sort of almost a generational conflict. Obviously, though Annika and Nathan grew up with the sort of the nuclear threat hovering over them in the 80s, by the 90s and the collapse of the former Soviet Union, the nuclear threat has been lifted, at least in theory, and then we get a new type of threat within a decade of, the Twin Towers. But all in all, as I say, you've got these two streams sort of, dovetailing beautifully. You've got the family drama, which normally would not engage me, but, it works here on me. I felt for the characters, the lies, the secrets, the missed opportunities, the delusions, the deceptions. They had consequences which I was made to feel, and that is really skillful writing. And also the wider question, of obviously the nuclear threat over the whole planet, but so Drum was out on strike when he was still at Ford's, out on strike during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which dominated the news for 3 days, and then gradually the workers are less interested in this thing that's so remote and doesn't seem to be real, and their focus is on the car strike. And in a way, we all live that to some extent, of the balance between the personal of our own sort of situation versus the much wider picture. And that always gets brought back into focus when you get something like 9/11 and then the war on terror and all that sort of stuff. And it's all done really skillfully here. And you can tell this is good writing, because often descriptions of things are just lists, whereas Evers actually he may do a list of objects in the nuclear shelter or whatever, but then he'll comment on it, or he'll put a value judgment on it that ties it all together as to why he's listing these things, which so often is left out in other writing. And just the other thing, another example I just wanted to read of the type of writing. So after the nuclear threat has sort of receded and we move into the 21st century, they go to visit an old army officer of theirs, because he's sort of done a private archive of all the nuclear stuff and what were drills and what were real, threats when the sirens went off. This is the officer speaking. "The war is over and no shots have been fired. 1 million contingencies planned and none ever arose. The only casualties, mental health. The only fatalities caused by stress, cirrhosis and cancer. We are the most pointless soldiers in history. 50 years of wargaming and nothing to show for it. Just a lot of shadow lies blinking now in the bright new dawn." I think that's really important, because people, who did live under the nuclear threat, who internalised it so that it did impact on their everyday lives, couldn't live a normal life, so did develop sort of, stress conditions and health problems associated with that, versus the likes of that soldier, and also James Carter to some extent, who goes, well, it's because we don't have the threat of war anymore. You know, we don't have this sort of Damocles hanging over our head, that morals have got loosened. And that officer's language there is wistful. He kind of wishes that it weren't just war games to no purpose, that they had actually been enacted, that they weren't just drills. So it's a very interesting concept. And all in all, as I say, a really good book, 5 stars. And onto the Liar's Dictionary. So the premise of this book is 2 characters who have alternate chapters. One called James Winsworth and the other called Mallory. Both work for this institution, which was a dictionary that was first put together at the turn of the 20th century, but because of the First World War carrying off most of its lexicographers into death in the trenches, was never sort of complete. It was published, but it wasn't completed. And now in the 21st century, it is Mallory's responsibility to help the editor digitise the original, all the sort of handwritten index cards. They don't want to put in the words that were left out because it was incomplete, but they do want to update it. So, for example, a word like marriage in 1900 meant strictly a heterosexual marriage, and obviously in the 21st century it doesn't mean that. So they are updating. They're updating what was the original in there, but they're not putting in what was missed out. And the 2 characters, Mallory and James, never meet because they're in different time zones. James, not zones, but different time eras. James was at the original 1900 office, and Mallory is obviously in the 21st century. But the problem with that is because these 2 characters never meet, there's no relationship between them, which means that the only thing they have in that ever links them is plot driven, which is quite unsatisfactory because normally when characters interact, you know, that is where the interest, the conflict, the tension lies. But these 2 are completely oblivious of each other's existence, so there's no real tension there. And overall, the book itself is quite gentle, it's quite twee, I'd say. It's whimsical, and there is despite the fact there are bomb threats, and despite the fact that a factory blows up, there's no real tension to this, and in a way it reads like a dictionary. That and in the preface it sort of alludes to this, that there's no real narrative through line to drag the reader through it. You know, each chapter is some other, you know, thing that may or may not have anything to do with what has preceded. And the characters are busy justifying themselves by justifying the meaning of words. Again, which I found quite alienating, I think, really, because both characters have sort of love interests, and there's this distinction between the sweet whispered nothings of love, where words don't really have any meaning, it's more the sound. Communication is almost just sound, you know, talking to your loved one and connecting at that level rather than the level of meaning, versus a book which is all about defining words very, very strictly, you know, in a dictionary. And those 2 things don't really join and mesh together. So I struggled with this book. It takes 150 pages for us to get to the interesting conceit of the book, which is that, you know, dictionary compilers always made up a couple of words that, you know, and gave them, you know, that were not real words, and they made up definitions for them because that was a way to protect copyright, because they knew that if those fake words appeared in somebody else's dictionary, that they just lifted yours lock, stock and barrel. They hadn't done their own research. And the editor in 2000, in the 21st century, has discovered there's a whole host of these false words, and has set Mallory on a task to hunt them all down. That is introduced on page 150. By page 160, we know who planted them. You know, it's given away in a very, very sort of heavy-handed hint. And also, I guessed the 21st century revelation, long before it was revealed, of who was behind the bomb threats. So that, again, there's no tension. It's all rather pointless, I think, unfortunately. It's not pointless if you just like twee and whimsical reads. I mean, this reminds me of the Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookshop, which I didn't like either, unfortunately. And, you know, Mallory and her partner, who's called Pip, you know, Pip runs a cafe, but she's worried about these bomb threats, so she comes into the office and helps her sort through all the index cards, trying to find out these false words. So their relationship, we are shown through this bizarre activity of defining words. You know, yes, there's a little bit of resonance between some words here and there that, you know, you can read back into their relationship, but it's a very odd way of carrying on, you know, sort of intimacy through talking about words rather than meaning words. These words aren't personal to them. These words are written out, scripted on index cards, and that's what they're doing as a shared activity. But they're not sharing the cards. They're each got their own pile of cards to do. It's all very odd and unsatisfactory. So I'm just going to read two tiny bits of it. My task for the day, this is Mallory, my task for the day was to look over David Swansby's efforts at digitising the text of Swansby's new encyclopaedic dictionary. It was his dream to honour the family name and the scope and vision of his forefather editors by updating the unfinished dictionary and putting it all online for free. He spoke of this as a noble project for the betterment of humanity and as a way of securing the Swansby legacy as something accomplished and celebrated rather than a noble damp squib. Privately, I looked up the entry for hubris, brackets N, as in noun. Now, in a normal novel, you wouldn't get, you know, that line, privately I looked up the entry for hubris, doesn't work. You know, it's just, it would appear to be the writer being too clever. In this context, yeah, it absolutely is justified. So I'm not criticising the author for that. But at the end of the day, Mallory, as someone who's worked on a dictionary for 3 years, would know what the word hubris means. You don't have to look it up. It's such a key word, you know, going back to ancient Greek drama and the origins of tragedy. You know, privately I looked up the entry for hubris. I don't think she'd do that. I don't think she'd have to do that. But again, it gives you this idea of there's a lot of word definitions and words being rolled out as to their etymological roots and their meanings and stuff in this book, which distances you. Although if you treat it like you're reading a dictionary or leafing through a dictionary here and there, maybe that works for you, I don't know. But then there was a nice thing, you know, sometimes the gags landed. I tried to explain the digitising of the dictionary to Pip one evening back in our flat. Most of the notes from the dictionary are from the last years of the 19th century, and the words that appear or do not appear amongst its pages reflect the times. I looked around our kitchen, for example. Say, for instance, tea bag. In 1899, no one was yet using the word, so it wouldn't appear in the body of the dictionary. Verbal noun, Pip asked. Rude, I made a face. So that's funny. You know, how tea bag, look it up in Urban Dictionary, which is, you know, a whole scope of dictionary that wouldn't apply here. You know, that gag lands, but there's a lot of the word gags that I feel don't land. And interestingly, I felt also that the book is very much starts off with a lot of sort of pun and wordplay and etymological derivation, and that drops right off by about halfway because then it becomes more plot driven, and it's less about the dictionary and more about what's going on with the bomb threat and what's going on with Peter Winsworth, you know, may or may not be falling in love with this woman. It's much more about plot and much less about dictionary definitions of words. And also, Peter Winsworth is an absolute milquetoast. He has nothing to him. For some reason, which I'm never fully cognizant of, he puts on a stammer, which sort of manages, you know, he is such a milquetoast that everyone in the office sort of, he's invisible to them. And yet increasingly more and more he does become visible to them in an equally unsatisfactory way. But he's such a milquetoast, he's not really worth following as a character because there's nothing to him. Yeah, I'm afraid I just didn't get on with this book all round. I mean, it is beautifully written. It's very erudite, but ultimately it's a novel with nothing at its heart, nothing at its core. as I say, a lot of the chapters sort of go on quite interesting in some places, but quite, you know, sort of rabbit holes about words. But do they drag you back into the plot? Well, no, because the plot is so lightweight. It's, you know, there's no stakes really. As I say, even though there's a bomb threat and a factory that blows up, there's nothing really ventured by. There's no threat or peril or menace really to the characters, because the tone of the whole book is you know, gentle, whimsical, which is fine. I guess I just don't like whimsy. I was very interested in this book because my current work project, I'm also do a thing where I'm defining words and looking at their etymological roots. I hope, but obviously the readers and publishers will be the judge of this, that it's a bit more rooted in the book itself, if that makes sense. That there's more reason for doing it other than the plot of this being set in an office that compiles dictionaries. Anyway, so I'm afraid I rather didn't get on with this book. As to upcoming reading, funnily enough, both of these link to my next reading intentions in different ways. So this was a sort of an epic of, a family epic of Britain from the 50s to the present day. This, Middle England, by Jonathan Coe, is a sort of supposedly similar but sort of about Brexit rather than the nuclear threat. So that is on the agenda. And the other one I don't have yet, it's not arrived. This is the Liar's Dictionary. I've ordered a book called The Dictionary of the Khazars, or Khazars, Khazars. Can't remember the writer. I'll put his name or her name up on screen. So again, you know, a dictionary, and it'll be interesting to compare how that approaches it to this. I know that's much more sort of postmodern in its structure, because apparently there's a female version of the dictionary and a male, and the two are sort of side by side and are very similar, except I assume the pronouns are different. I don't know, I haven't got it. But somewhere there's 17 words that differ from one to the other. So I'm absolutely fascinated to see how that book works, and also how it compares to this as a book about, as a novel about dictionaries. Okay, so till next time, thanks very much.